Well, hello, everybody. It's October 2nd, 2025, the year of our Lord. And my name is David Leis, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier Live. And thank you for joining us yet again for this broadcast as we talk about very important issues for Canadians. And we so much appreciate um, your comments. It was really remarkable how last week we had yet again an extraordinary, I think, panel that talked about the phenomenon of debanking and what's really happening right beneath our noses. And thanks so much, Ruckin, saying, looking forward to this discussion. Thanks in advance. Thanks for your comments. We get thousands of them, and we very much appreciate them. Hello, Charlotte. Um, I'm wondering, is that person from Charlottetown? That seems like a play on words with their name. But we really appreciate how we have so many people joining us who care about our nation from coast to coast to coast. And we're really grateful for that kind of feedback. We welcome your comments and participation. And yes, Charlottetown is from Charlottetown, PEI. What an incredible place. And the birth literally happened there of Confederation in 1867. So that's terrific. And I have fond memories of a child going through that incredibly historic legislature where it was all brought together. So it's really quite a moment in history that we need to remember and celebrate. And so we're going to turn to a very important topic today. It's a bit hard to fully grasp and comprehend, but it has to do with censorship, the emergence of a whole new raft of laws and initiatives, particularly at the federal level. Not entirely. There's other bits of it in other provinces. So I'm very fortunate to have um, two yet again great voices of common sense around this that are knowledgeable, not just simply about those laws. You may have heard about Bill C-9 as one of others. There's even other ones like C-8. They kind of name them in all kinds of numbers relative to the parliamentary session. So we need to pay attention here to what is really going on when it comes to limiting speech, all in the name of, well, good things. I mean, who is in favor of hate, but how do we walk the line in a free and democratic society? Or is this frankly a push? Has anyone read 1984 by George Orwell? I would encourage people to reread that book and look for doublespeak, the phenomenon where you use language to kind of mask over the real intention or to basically lie in terms of what the real agenda is in terms of control. And what's the significance of that? Why should this matter to every Canadian? So we're going to dare to talk about this issue and try to provide some helpful perspective as we look at this issue. So in the meantime, I want to just thank again you for your comments and bring some of that feedback up as we get towards Thanksgiving. I am thankful for your comments, and we have a number of comments that I'd like to share with you that we'd like to bring up here. And it says, one is, thank you. Very thankful. I found your channel. This is the type of information we, the people, need to help our community stay blessed. And thank you very much from CAJE Partisan 8898. Those are quite the mouthful. Excellent interview. It is refreshing to hear discussions of a practical rather than ideological nature. Johnny Aloha 69. So thank you very much, Johnny. Those are certainly make our day when we hear those kinds of comments because we are trying to serve you, the audience. We're trying to bring, as the Frontier Center does, try to bring information to what are sometimes very complicated issues, but try to bring perspective that honors our, like, obviously we believe in a free and democratic society. So we want to make Canada the most prosperous free nation. So this is very, very important. There's a lot going on in this country. So as we kind of come on board, and before I dive into it with our panel, I want to highlight a number of news items. There's so much going on. One of which is the introduction of a new bill would allow bans of people on the internet in spite of multiple international statements framing internet access as a right. People are at the federal level introducing what's called Bill C-8, and that is now on the order table. I believe it's undergoing second reading in the House of Commons in Ottawa, and it includes a provision under which Ottawa could pull internet services from any, quote, specified person. So the cyber bills are coming back, and we'll talk later about that in our discussion. I also wanted to highlight a very interesting issue that's happening, and that's the appeals are happening to a landmark decision in Richmond, BC, called the Cowichan decision. It has to do with a First Nation there, the Cowichan tribe. And it's interesting how both the city of Richmond is appealing the decision to the that was made by the Supreme Court there. And I believe also the BC government is appealing it, and also the federal government is appealing it. And I believe the opposition leader has weighed in on it. And I wanted to share this clip with you because I think it's a good summary of why this decision is so significant when it comes to property rights.
Sarah Ritchie with the Canadian Press.
Thank
you wrote
you,
a
sir.
letter recently to the Justice Minister about the BC Supreme Court decision in
Yes.
the Cowichan case. What exactly do you think that the court got wrong that the government ought to argue?
Well, the court got property rights wrong. The court found in its ruling that the fee simple property rights that have existed for hundreds of years and are the foundation of our very economy should be overturned. That would devastate our entire economy. It is already causing investment to flee our country. People are not going to build factories, open up jobs, start businesses, or even buy homes if they think that their land could be confiscated and given to someone else. So we oppose this ruling, and we call on the federal government to make legal arguments at the appeal level to overturn it. We hope that the case is heard quickly so that we can put this matter to rest. We as Conservatives stand for property rights. We want all of the property owners in British Columbia and across Canada to know that we will protect your home. Your home belongs to you, and we will fight against any legal attempts to take it away from you.
So there you go. There's a comment from the leader of the opposition. So I just want to underline the significance of that decision. And of course, there's fair debate about, well, does it put in jeopardy property rights? We had an extraordinary conversation a few weeks ago about this with my panel of experts, and they were lawyers. And so I would encourage you to look at that recording of that discussion. But this is a very important issue. To be clear, property rights are foundational. So pay attention to that one. Also, I wanted to share this clip as we look at our financial situation in our country. We've got a lot of governments that spend a lot of money, too much, many would argue. And so much so that recently it was fascinating to hear the testimony from Jason Jacques, who's the interim head of the Parliamentary Budget Office. And he had this to say about our financial situation at the federal level.
We're on the path to being in trouble. So that's what our 5-year forecast, the numbers that we released earlier this week, indicate. That if left unchanged, the fiscal path that the government's currently on will definitely result in us being in quite a bit of trouble and having to make some hard decisions.
Now, in getting here, what do you attribute this to? Is this like Donald Trump's trade policies, you know, the roosters coming home to nest, or is this about government spending priorities and not controlling it?
I think it's kind of a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B. So there definitely is an impact in comparison to our previous forecast. You can definitely see the impact on the overall growth for the Canadian economy. A larger part of it is the government policy decisions. So there ends up being about $115 billion in net new costs since the last time we prepared a forecast back immediately prior to the election in March 2025. And a good part of that is attributable to defense. So changing geopolitical environment, priorities for the government to increase spending on defense, which we saw that was announced in June, earlier this year in June. And of course on the tax side, on the revenue side. So $6 billion a year, so about $30 billion over the next year, plus revenue that we're no longer going to have because the lowest personal rate went from 15 down to 14.
Okay, so there you have it. There's a warning about the financial situation of this country. So let's stay tuned as the federal government tables its budget on November the 4th, among many other provincial governments. But obviously, this kind of pathway is not sustainable. So I think that was interesting that party was speaking up. I also wanted to highlight an initiative by the Alberta government to be a proponent to building pipelines. And this is by Daniel Smith. So this is an overview of that initiative that we just heard about, I believe, yesterday.
We've come together here today because Canada stands at a critical crossroads. Beneath our feet here in Alberta, we stand on oil reserves valued at over $9 trillion. What stands before us right now is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to unlock our wealth of resources and become a world-leading energy superpower. And that's why we are announcing that the Government of Alberta will be the proponent of an oil pipeline to the Northwest BC coast, with the support and technical advice of 3 major pipeline companies, including Southbow, Enbridge, and Trans Mountain. Our government will make a formal application to the Federal Project Office under the Building Canada Act. With today's announcement, Alberta is prepared to answer the call to support global energy security efforts while creating lasting prosperity for Albertans and Canadians for generations to come.
So that initiative is unfolding. So stay tuned. There's been a lot of reaction, including comments from the Premier of BC, David Leis, who said, well, this project really doesn't exist because there's no private proponent for the project. And that's the whole point, is that they're trying to clear the way, the Alberta government, to enable it so the conditions are that actually there would be an investor. So that's very interesting. And also it's fascinating, the Premier of Alberta was recently commenting about some terrible tragedies on a First Nation, and this is happening in different settings right across the country, in communities, cities, towns, but also First Nations. And I wanted to share this, where a woman killed by a brother in a mass stabbing on a Manitoba First Nation. What a tragedy. And so Daniel Smith made this comment relative to another bill, C-75.
You saw what just happened in Manitoba. A man released on bail on conditions that they didn't go see his family, and he went and murdered his sister and stabbed 7 other people. That is happening all over this country, and I can tell you every single premier has been asking for over a year for us to fix the wrong turn that the Trudeau government made. So if you want to remember what happened, it was Bill C-75. And what and I'm sure the justice will correct me if I'm describing this wrong, but what the direction was that a judge couldn't just look at the crime on the face of it to determine whether that person should be released. They had to look at the foundational factors about why they became a criminal. And so they're essentially, if you had a bad childhood, if you were abused, if you were suffering from intergenerational trauma, and so on and so forth, that became one of the conditions for releasing somebody. But in releasing them, they go back to the very community that they came from and are victimizing those same community members. And so what we have been asking for is that we have to go back to the same kind of rules of court that we used to have. If they are violent, if they are dangerous, if they are repeat criminals, or some combination of all of those, you have to be able to keep them behind bars so that they don't go out and continue to reoffend. We've seen the stats that show it's actually, it's true. It's a small number of criminals who, as you described, are just going out and reoffending. And it's so demoralizing to our police force that before they finish the paperwork booking a guy, that he's back out on the streets again. You saw what just happened in Manitoba.
So there's a summary of another big issue that's happening around the country. So let's pay attention to that. So now let's dive into the topic of Bill C-9 and the whole effort to control and regulate speech. By the way, there's an interesting comment here from the audience. I don't know why the idea of having a branch off the pipeline close to Lake Superior to a new LNG plant on that lake to go to the EU. Well, interesting question. And certainly that's why Hudson's Bay is talked about as well. So let's turn to our panel. I want to introduce a incredible duo here, a dynamic John Carpay, who's the head president of the Justice Center. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us again.
Glad to be with you and all of your viewers and listeners.
Well, it's great to have you back. You're a regular. And then also we have Vice President Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, Vice President of Research and Policy at Frontier. And great to see you again, Marco.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So we're going to dive into it. Bill C-9. John, can you explain to us the highlights of what this bill is really all about, in your opinion? You wrote I think, a great analysis in the Epoch Times, a great newspaper. John Carpay says the new hate crime bill criminalizes feelings and restricts free speech. What do you mean by that, John?
Well, we've already had, it's already been a criminal offense in Canada for a long time. The willful promotion of hatred, Section 319 of the Criminal Code. And so you cannot, in public speech, you cannot promote hatred against a group identified by its race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity, religion, so on and so forth. You can vilify and promote hatred against people on the basis of their decision not to get injected with COVID vaccine, but not on the list of prohibited grounds. What C-9 does is it takes that criminal legislation and puts it on steroids by, first of all, getting rid of the requirement that a hate speech prosecution must first be reviewed by the Attorney General of the province before it can proceed. So that's a safeguard to protect free speech, that it's not typically with other offenses, it's the local police, the local Crown prosecutors, they decide, and that's it, right? You don't have every criminal charge being reviewed by the Attorney General. But with the hate speech prosecutions, you do. So Bill C-9 would get rid of that, which is going to likely lead to far more hate speech prosecutions and quite possibly a chilling effect on speech in Canada. It's a small step towards becoming like the United Kingdom, where you've got police knocking on the doors of citizens over some Twitter post against immigration or something. You know, we're not there, but that's the direction we're moving in. The other aspects include increased penalties if the judge finds that hate was a motivating factor. So if you are found guilty of robbery or theft or assault or murder, whatever the crime, the sentence can go up dramatically. So from a 2-year maximum sentence to a 5-year maximum sentence, or from a 14-year maximum sentence to life in prison, if the judge finds that hate was a motivating factor in the crime that was committed. We also have the criminalization of displaying the Nazi swastika. Not the communist hammer and sickle. That's okay, even though that was the banner that was proudly upheld while communists in Russia, China, Cambodia, other countries murdered tens of millions of people under the banner of the communist hammer and sickle. That's okay. You can display that. You can wave that. Not a problem. But the Nazi swastika, you can get up to 2 years in jail if you display it for improper purpose outside of education, art, or religious symbolism. So if you've got a copy of William Shirer's book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, with a swastika on it, like, that's okay. You can keep that. But it's going to be interesting because the swastika is actually an ancient Sanskrit symbol for prosperity and good fortune. And there are Buddhists and Hindus in Canada and around the world who will display, I've seen it myself, I've seen swastikas on houses, yes. Mm-hmm. Houses of Buddhists and Hindus who display that. I suppose they're hoping to attract prosperity and good fortune. So hopefully the police are going to notice the subtle difference that the Asian religious ancient swastika, the arms are pointing in a different direction. I don't know if police are going to get that, or if we're going to see a lot of Hindus and Buddhists getting arrested for displaying a swastika on their homes. We'll have to wait and see on that. So that's Bill C-9, some of the highlights.
Wow. So just to clarify, just before we turn to our friend Marco Navarro-Genie for his response, I want to clarify something. Are you saying that we already have laws that deal with hate speech in this country, John? And if so, why do we need this one?
Well, they've been on the books for a long time. And the other thing that's already on the books, Section 718 of the Criminal Code expressly authorizes judges to take hate motivation into consideration when imposing a sentence. So that's already there. So if you robbed a convenience store, you're found guilty of robbery because you threatened the clerk with a knife or a baseball bat or a gun or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then you also made a bunch of racial slurs while you were conducting the robbery. You can get an increased sentence if the judge believes that the crime was motivated by hatred. That's already on the books right now. What Bill C-9 does is it puts it on steroids, and not only can the judge take it into account when imposing a sentence, but the maximum sentence will go from 2 years to 5 years, 10 years to 5 years to 10 years, 14 years to life in prison. So it's taking existing laws that are probably not having a huge chilling effect on speech, although we don't really know that. Mm-hmm. But it's taking the existing laws and putting them on steroids. What's driving it is, I think, woke ideology. It's that equity, diversity, inclusion. And so it's this kind of, it's an attack on centuries of rule of law and legal protections for free speech.
Okay, so I just want to clarify that for a moment, because you've outlined a lot there. You said they're putting this on steroids. And you said something very interesting before, and that is that the decision-making goes right to, who is it again? A minister? Like a politician on this issue? Or like who makes the decisions here, John?
So the current law, currently, for pretty much every criminal code offense, it's the local police, the local crown prosecutors, they decide whether or not to prosecute. And if it's in the public interest to do so, if there's enough evidence, if there's a reasonable likelihood of conviction, local police, local prosecutors make that decision. Except for hate speech, if they want to prosecute somebody for a hate speech offense, it has to be reviewed by the Attorney General, or the Justice Minister of the province has to review it and give authorization for that to proceed. That's the current law. With Bill C-9, that review process is scrapped, so the local police and crown prosecutors can decide on their own whether to proceed with hate speech prosecution without that review from a higher authority above.
Interesting. Wow, this sounds like quite a change of pace here with C-9. So I want to turn to you, Marco Navarro-Genie. What are your thoughts around Bill C-9? What's happening before our eyes here?
Well, what we see here, as John points out, is essentially the revving up of the punishments that the state can hand out to people for expressing an opinion or because an opinion has shaped against somebody's feelings. As John pointed out, there used to be, since 1970, I think it was introduced, the hate and propaganda aspects to the criminal code, where hate was what lawyers call an aggravator to sentencing. Now, the hate component is essentially a category on its own, which alone can serve to charge someone. So it's essentially scaling and bringing things up, heating things up quite a bit. And we have seen this, John also pointed out, the case of England. Look, on February 14th of this year, for example, just to situate it in the sort of larger context, the Vice President of the United States gave a speech at the Munich Security Conference. Mm-hmm. And he pointed out that that Russia isn't really the greatest enemy of the West. Although, parts of the West are at war with Russia. But that the enemy is essentially within, because we have instituted a whole array of laws. And he pointed out several in Germany, in France, and in the United Kingdom, where essentially people are slicing up into little pieces fundamental components of what we normally would recognize as pillars of democracy. And so Vance was pointing out that we are eroding our own democracy, that we are our own enemies in relation to, and by we, actually, he didn't say we, he said the ruling elites that are essentially pushing this kind of legislation, which serve on the basis of appearing to be caring about vulnerable people, because that's essentially what C-9 does. It is designed to silence dissent, and we have seen it in many different places, in Canada as well. One of the things that the bill purports to do, C-9, is protect, for example, religious expression and the right to practice one's own religion. And what is interesting about this is that if you go and protest, for example, in front of a church, this is now it has been unlawful for quite a while, but this is again sort of revving things up. But people need to ask themselves the question: is this really designed to protect the practice of religion in a country where in the last 5 years or so, there have been hundreds of attacks on Christian churches? People have fired upon synagogues and so forth without much repercussion. There hasn't been all that many charges brought upon these things. And so I don't buy, I guess what I'm saying is I don't buy that this is in order to protect religious expression. This is essentially some kind of a Trojan horse to stump dissent.
Wow. So what do you think, folks? I'm talking with John Carpay, the head of the Justice Center, and Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, the Vice President of Research and Policy at Frontier, regarding Bill C-9. What do you think about it? Is it just another way of ramping up control over free speech? Is it a way that is, as Marco alludes to, a Trojan horse to gain more control? It's interesting, the comments. Susan says truth is being shut down, and I think that kind of summarizes the point being made here. Is Bill C-9 really a fundamental attack on the freedom of speech? And why does freedom of speech really matter? I mean, we all agree that in a free and democratic society, we should be, we'd like to think that we're tolerant of each other, but we can have debate. But if someone offends you and your feelings are hurt, isn't that enough to just say, well, let's stop it. Let's stop this hate, John? Surely we should be more compassionate and realize that we can't just run over people's feelings. What's going on here? And I don't mean to sound too rhetorical here, but it seems like there's a lot of people who think that just because my feelings are hurt, that's a pretext to shut it all down.
Well, free speech includes necessarily a right to offend. Free speech is worthless if you don't have the right to peacefully, in a nonviolent manner, right? You can't be assaulting people and saying that's part of your free speech rights, or smashing store windows or burning cars or obstructing people from going about their business, right? But but if it's speech, right, then the reason we have the guarantee in the first place is to protect the minority view. When 99% of the population thinks that what you're saying is wrong or false or dangerous or offensive, you're still allowed to say it. And if your free speech is curtailed by, you can say whatever you want as long as it's not offensive, that's not free speech at all, because there's always going to be somebody who's offended by something, right? Mm-hmm. So the point is that we can say what we want, and the government does not control our vocal cords. Now, it's tempting to say, well, hate is a bad thing, so let's get rid of hate speech. But who gets to decide what is hate? It's completely subjective. You know, the three of us on this panel, we could all look at the same thing or hear the same thing. One or two of us think that it's hateful. The other one or two think, no, it's just an opinion. So it's very subjective. And so when you ban hate speech, what happens is you end up banning the speech that the government hates. And that's the danger.
Would you agree, Marco, that that's the danger, is that we politicize and put into government's hands their political determination of what the heck is hate speech? And that's a problem.
I think that there's several reasons as to why this is dangerous. One of them, of course, is that, as John points out, it brings a level of punishment to people's opinions and beliefs, regardless of whether you actually, commit a crime or break a law, or an existing law, as we recognize them today. It is also dangerous because it injects into the public square a chilling effect. We have seen in Canada, for example, that parents, pastors, feminists, and farmers and protesters have been charged for saying things that people don't like, or people find offensive. There is a danger, of course, as well in the weaponization of certain beliefs. And some of which are religious, by the way, right? We have seen that in Britain, for example, people who have quoted verses from the Bible, from Leviticus, for example, have been charged with hate speech, and certainly C-9 lends itself to that. And finally, it is also dangerous because it risks, and we've seen it in Britain again, it risks sending a significant amount of police resources and security resources after regular citizens who have some kind of maybe weird opinion or an opinion that people don't like, instead of dealing with criminals and actual crime. And in Canada, as we all know, crime has been on the rise. There are real issues. And so to be persecuting people for expressing an opinion where there are people spraying, malls with submachine gun fire is a problem.
Wow. I think we're onto something here in the sense that, this is really a very worrisome bill, C-9. And then on top of that, if that weren't bad enough, we've got other numbers, C-8. What the heck is that about, John?
Well, C-8 is another very lengthy bill. I haven't even been able to conclude my review, but it includes provisions in the name of protecting cybersecurity, bearing in mind that governments never take away your rights and freedoms without presenting a nice sounding pretext, right? So it's always, we've got to protect you from hate speech. We got to protect you from a virus. We have to protect you from the hackers and attacks on the internet. We have to protect you from terrorism. There's always a pretext that is offered that sounds nice. Governments do not say, we're taking away your rights and freedoms because we're a bunch of power-hungry SOBs and we just enjoy being on a power trip and we like having you under our thumb. So that's why we're taking, they don't say that. No, it's something nice. So to protect us, here's the thing, hacking and destroying property are already criminal code offenses. Maybe we need better enforcement. But what Bill CA does, among other things, is it gives the public safety minister the power to issue an order to remove anybody from the internet if the minister thinks that they are a threat to cybersecurity. So this just opens the door to the minister. Maybe they don't like what the Frontier Centre is saying, or the Fraser Institute, or the Justice Centre, or whatever, Citizen Mark Smith on his blog. And the minister could decide that the content of your speech is a threat to cybersecurity. And the minister can then order the internet service provider to deny you access to the internet. So they can target individuals and take away their ability to use the internet and to speak on the internet. Theoretically, you might be able to take the minister's order to court, but then that, practically speaking, that opens up the problem. How many people have got an extra 100,000 kicking around that they can just spend on legal services to make a court application, to get a court to quash the minister's order, and court applications take 2 or 3 years. So even though theoretically, even if you could take the minister's order to court, you're going to be kicked off the internet for months, if not years. And so that's problematic. And it doesn't really solve, it doesn't fix the problem. I mean, these things are already crimes. To hack into somebody else's computer system and to cause damage is already a criminal code offense. So we just need to enforce the criminal code as it is now. We don't need to give power to the federal government to kick people off the internet.
Wow. We're getting a lot of comments. Charlottetown says, we do not need protection. People need to learn from their mistakes. People need to relearn critical thinking. And I guess the last time I checked, the government's role was to facilitate the basics. Like, what is it again? Oh yeah, justice, safety, so people don't go back into communities like First Nations and murder each other. Instead, we're letting them loose. And we have a situation where they're going to devote valuable resources, Marco, to, as you say, divert police resources away from real crime. And now they're going to clamp down on freedom of speech through this kind of legislation. So my question to you, Marco, is what's driving this? Why is this kind of movement of bills happening again and again? It seems like this is just really bad legislation. Why is this even a priority within this government? Help us understand what's driving this.
A good portion of it, if you just listen to the rhetoric, is designed to make people believe that the government is there to protect you, right, and protect you from being offended. But the reality is this has been driven by an ideology which is very extreme in so many different senses. This is essentially the woke ideology, and is designed not just to counter ideological conflict or ideological or people who have different ideology, but is designed to silence them and essentially nearly obliterate them in a sense. Because if somebody, for example, going back to the discussion on C-8, if somebody is essentially prevented from accessing the internet, well, you might say it's not that big a deal because it's just virtual life. Who cares, right? You can go on and visit with your children and live your life just fine. But the reality is that the access to the internet has become such a crucial feature of our lives. In essence, it prevents you from doing banking. It prevents you from meeting other people, doing business. There are lots of business now on the internet. And it also prevents you from accessing educational services in a whole variety of government services that are now delivered online. And so the motivation here is essentially to stomp and to erase people who have opinions different than ours. And by ours, I mean the progressive ideology, right? People who are or consider themselves progressives and liberal progressives, but are also have been indoctrinated and miseducated to believe that other people should not have contrary opinions to theirs.
Wow, that is quite a summary, Marco. I really appreciate it. And it's very concerning because it seems to me, John, that what's happening is we're substituting our society, or there's some, I would suggest perhaps a minority. If you look at poll after poll, 85% of Canadians don't really like this woke ideology. And that's fine. There's others that can advocate otherwise. But they're embedded in our institutions, our government, and they're pushing this. And so is what's happening a profound redefinition. It's really redefining the law to being one that's based more on precedent and one that's based on enabling people for freedom. It's substituting that truth in with feelings. So feelings become the new truth. And if you feel like you're offended, we're going to give you, as a mechanism, as Marco alluded to, a weapon to pound those other parties metaphorically through really a punishing law that says that you're going to be punted out of the public square. So that is fundamentally changing the character of the law. Is that a fair comment, John?
Well, and it is, and you can see the politicization when the Justice Minister Sean Fraser announced Bill C-9. He said that this was a response to rising anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, transphobia, and homophobia. End of quote. Conspicuous by its absence, he makes no reference at all to the dozens of Christian churches that have been burned to the ground, that have been destroyed by arson. Said nothing about that. He mentions anti-Semitism, Islamophobia,
yes,
homophobia, transphobia. Anti-Semitism, I think it's pretty real and straightforward and pretty clear what that means. Islamophobia is a pretty vague term. I mean, if you are worried about a minority of Muslims who believe that it's okay to use violence to advance Islam, if you are worried about it, or if you're opposed to that, does that make you Islamophobic? I don't know, but it's a pretty vague term. Transphobic is a term that they will slap on anybody who says there are only two biological sexes, and the transgender ideology should not be pushed on children. And parents should be informed if their child wants to start taking puberty blockers or wants to start using opposite sex names. If you hold any of those, I wouldn't even call them conservative positions. I mean, they're pretty just common sense, scientific positions. You're transphobic. Homophobia, I mean, who knows what that means? Maybe if you, for religious, practicing Jews, Christians, Muslims, others, not agreeing with the state's new definition that marriage can be between two people of the same sex, maybe that makes you homophobic. Who knows? But these are very vague and very political terms. And so when the Justice Minister is bringing that forward and he says, we're doing this because of rising anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, but nothing is said about the reality of churches being burned to the ground in Canada, that tells you how political this is. And it's a gradual erosion, of I'm 58 years old. I remember as a teenager and as somebody in their 20s, I never heard of cancel culture 40 years ago. People seem to recognize that, I disagree with what you're saying. It's stupid, it's horrible, it's false, it's wrong. But you didn't have this call. Whereas now you've got people that would criminalize residential school denialism. So if you don't buy into the narrative of the dominant narrative, and if you question the unsubstantiated claim that there's 215 children buried in Kamloops, that should be criminal speech. We had David Suzuki saying that if you are a climate holocaust denier, if you don't agree with David Suzuki that mankind controls the weather, you should be locked up in jail. Gosh. So this is it's a cultural decline, and it's a move away from an appreciation for free speech.
Wow. So what do you think, people? I am seeing so many thoughtful comments. It's hard to know where to begin. Susan says Christianity will not be protected. The Bible will be hate speech. Wow, that just about sums it up right there. There's other comments that have been made here, like truth is not hate speech. And I think for me, that's the whole point. I mean, I'm obviously I'd like to think a thoughtful advocate for freedom of speech, not only in the sense that we can learn from each other as human beings, that we can make the world better as we have discussion in a tolerant manner, hopefully in a respectful way, but sometimes it gets heated and people do get offended. But it's foundational to the scientific method. This is the whole point. Science doesn't care about your feelings. We care about the arrival at truth. And if we give up that, we give up our prosperity, and frankly, we give up Western civilization. And I think that's the point, is that this is all chipping away at the foundations of Western civilization, period. Marco, am I being too dramatic, or am I just having a hissy fit over nothing here?
Not at all. To build on something that John pointed out, our civilization, and that includes our legal system, is based on this thing we call reason. The rule of law, which is a concept that goes back all the way to the Greeks. Aristotle talks about the rule of reason, and so our system of our judicial system is based on the measure of reasonableness, which again rests on reason, and our entire culture and intellectual heritage, from the Greeks to the Romans and the medieval period, et cetera, rests on this idea of reason. And what we have seen, and I began to be aware of this in the 80s, when the culture started turning. Alan Bloom published a book entitled what was the title? The
Closing of the American Mind.
The Closing of the American Mind, thank you.
Yes.
In which he started to point out that this creeping emotivism, he called it, in other words, this idea that things rest on emotion, was taking over reason. And the problem is, of course, that most reasonable individuals can agree on what is reasonable, but changing feelings and emotions change from minute to minute, second to second, sometimes, depending on the mercurial nature of the people involved. And so what the shift is that we have gone from trying to set laws on reasonable concepts to now spelling out these features of legislation that rest on nothing but emotion. In the British case, for example, the legislation in Britain says that things that are grossly offensive will be punishable by law. And ours in C-9 says the willful promotion of hatred. That's kind of the equivalent. And so again, we are beginning to base all kinds of punitive actions on nothing but the subjective. I feel offended, this hurt my feelings, and therefore I'm going to go to the police and declare that this person is hateful. Notice that in the common parlance today, at least from the woke part of the culture, everything is hateful, right? And so this is in fact the weaponization of that of feeling.
Well said. John, you had a comment?
Well, just to take off from what Marco said, when the CBC covered the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the CBC said he is far right, so they're suggesting he's a fascist, because traditionally far right was seen, it was a synonym for fascism. Distinct from, fascism is completely distinct, very different from a classical liberal viewpoint of limited government and the rule of law and protection for rights and freedoms of the individual, human rights, freedom of speech. Fascism is completely different. It's about forcing everybody to come on board and support a big government project. And they've got conservatism, which there's different definitions, but also completely different from fascism. What does the CBC do, right? With our $1.4 billion per year that they're getting, they say Charlie Kirk is far right, and they say that his speech is harmful and hateful. And so there you go. And this is so destructive to our culture, because if you say that somebody's far right and their speech is harmful and hateful, you thereby absolve yourself of any obligation or responsibility to have a discussion with them, because it's like, well, okay, so you're hateful, your speech is harmful, therefore I don't need to hear what you have to say. I don't need to talk with you. I don't need to listen. I don't need to have a dialogue with you because you are fascist, you're far right. Okay, so it's these kind of tactics that are just chipping away at the free expression, which is unfortunate, because as you said, David, the science depends on it, right? At one point, the science was that the Earth is flat and the sun revolves around the Earth. It was the science that doctors should not wash their hands before delivering babies. That was the science. Okay, but thankfully, real science came forward, and there was debate, there was discussion, and you have a progression towards truth thanks to that debate. And so that's why it's so dangerous. It's not just that I would feel rotten about being denied my right to speak my opinions, although that's certainly also relevant, but even just for society, if you don't have the debate, then you don't have good laws, you don't have good science.
And to connect it to the other aspect of the culture, which is the anti-scientific part that John is pointing out, is essentially the elevation of the subjective. A man can be a woman and a woman can be a man in this sort of set of culture, right? And we're not supposed to question that. So it's entirely anti-scientific. To the point about the far right, if we think about the political spectrum, say measuring 100 meters, right? And the far right being at the end of those 100 meters and the far left being at the other end of those 100 meters. The extent to which you will perceive somebody being on the far right is how far you are on the left. Because if you are kind of in the center at the sort of 50-meter point, the guys on the right are on the right and the guys on the left are on the left. But people who continuously keep talking about the far right is because they are essentially sitting at the far end of the opposite point in the spectrum.
That's right. Yeah, it is almost a bit absurd and confusing, because I believe it was Joseph Stalin. The last time I checked, he was a devout communist of extraordinary authoritarian proclivities and did horrendous things to millions of people to kill them. Described the fascists as far right, when in fact the fascists were, of course, as everyone knows, devout socialists. So it's all relative to your perspective. It's really absurd, right? But yeah, and subjective. So point well taken, Marco. But in this discussion, and this has been certainly very far-reaching, and I hope an eye-opener for people. I find this almost surreal, this kind of discussion, that in 2025, our country, with this long history of honoring the spirit of freedom for individuals to run their lives, is at this point in time. And it's very important to wake up. I wanted to talk, I'd be remiss if I didn't raise the issue of institutions and professions, because I really do believe most Canadians don't buy this intellectual tripe. And thank you, Kenzie, for your comment. Yes, David, that drives me mad, LOL. It is really, whether you cry or laugh, it is very disturbing what's happening. And what I find so disturbing as well is how this ideology, this pernicious, hateful ideology, has wormed its way into so many institutions, including professional associations. And John, so I want to turn to you first, and then I'll switch to you, Marco, because we've talked about this before. But legal societies that are supposed to be self-governing societies, like they're given these special powers, all these professional associations to self-govern. You see them, like whether it's nurses, doctors, lawyers. I mean, there's a whole series of these societies that are given these extra powers to self-govern. And yet they seem to be dropping the ball. Like even, the Association of Accountants, for God's sake. are trying to put in all kinds of language that really reflect this pernicious ideology, whether it's net zero or DEI, all kinds of them. John, help us figure out, how do we renew these legal societies, and why would anyone go to a lawyer? No offense to lawyers, because I know that we need them. But why would anyone go to a lawyer when they have to belong to a society that's been taken over by a bunch of these ideological activists? Am I being, again, too dramatic?
Well, you saw Amy Ham, British Columbia, disciplined by the British Columbia College of
Case in
Nurses
point.
and Midwives, found guilty of professional misconduct or unprofessional conduct. Why? Because she said publicly that there's only two sexes, and she's argued correctly, in my view, that women should have safe female-only spaces where men may not enter. That's one example. The Ontario College of Psychologists going after Dr. Peterson. In Alberta, you cannot practice law unless you've taken a woke indoctrination course called The Path, where the Law Society will teach you that you have to support decolonization. I don't know if that means something like in British Columbia, you've got some public parks where non-Aboriginals cannot enter the public park. Is that part of
I apologize for the
decolonization?
interruption. Can you, sorry, you got to repeat that, because people are going to miss this. What is the path? Like, sorry, is it
Not the shining path.
Yeah.
Well, I have
So
to be
there's a course.
re-educated to be a lawyer. You've got to go through kind of an indoctrination camp. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. I've taken the course. It took me 5 to 8 hours. It was reasonably straightforward. You just got to, push on the button and kind of make your way through. If you answer incorrectly, they bring the question back in front of you again to get you to answer it correctly. So it's kind of hard to fail, but you have to tell them what they want to hear. And so you hear that colonization, which they never quite define, but they make it clear it's a bad thing. And decolonization, which they don't define specifically. I mean, I wonder, does that mean that all the African Canadians, European Canadians, Asian Canadians all need to go back to their continents of origin? I don't know. They don't define specifically what decolonization means, but they do say it's a very good thing, and every lawyer should strive to work on decolonization. And in British Columbia, it's not that different. There's a controversy there because the legal education that the Law Society of British Columbia is imposing on lawyers includes recognition of there's a claim made by the Kamloops Indian Band that there's the bodies of 215 children that are buried there. And so to be a lawyer in British Columbia, you have to go through training by the Law Society, which says that this is a fact. Well, it's not a fact. It's an unproven allegation, and it's probably false because the Kamloops Indian Band got more than $12 million to conduct an excavation to get to the truth of whether there are children buried there. And 4 years later, there's no excavation conducted. They've pocketed the 12 million and they've not used it for the intended purpose. So it's pretty safe to say that it's a false claim. But if you want to be technically accurate, you would say it's an unsubstantiated claim that there's 215 children buried in Kamloops. But yet the Law Society of British Columbia would have lawyers go through training in which the lawyer gets to learn the so-called the fact of the 215 bodies.
Unbelievable. I mean, I think this is a very dangerous game. We're playing with facts and evidence, the rules of evidence in the law, and it's just spreading like a virus. We talk about COVID-19. This is again like a mind virus that is doing great damage to our society. It's affecting our relationships, where we kind of lose our tolerance and patience to have discussions with people as we seek the truth. And it does damage, I would argue, in terms of the trust and the confidence in our institutions. If I feel like I'm dealing with somebody like my teacher in a public school who thinks who knows what, and they're not teaching the basis of the scientific method, then why would you send your child to a public school, Marco? Like, doesn't this become a really problematic time in our society then?
Yeah, and look, not to get too Christian, but Saint Augustine pointed out that the one of the greatest sins is hubris, pride, and
Indeed.
at the heart of this is the heart of tyranny. It doesn't take very much to understand that tyranny is tyranny because the people at the heart of tyranny, the tyrant, considers himself or herself infallible. And what we are seeing here is essentially this same idea creep up, that these people who profess all these beliefs have the truth and are infallible. And so there are many markers by which one can sort of evaluate the democratic level of a society. But the principle, the hallmark of free government is whether there is a reasonable toleration for dissent, for variety of opinion, and for the ability to critique government. And what we are doing here is essentially giving or accepting that government has the arrogant power to be infallible, to tell us what is true, what is hate, and defining all these terms that, by the way, there are shelves and shelves in libraries across the Western world that have not been able to define things as complex as hatred and gross dissent and feelings and all these things. So the idea that they can command the exact meaning of these words and criminalize disagreement with them, at the heart of this is this tyrannical sense of pride.
I think you're onto something, Marco. It reminds me again of your word hubris. And who are they to believe that they are gods?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right. So this is a tough discussion, as usual, my friends. And I really appreciate the audience, the comments. This is a very important time in our country. So as we wind up our discussion, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask sincerely, what can we do? As a citizen, what can we do in this kind of situation as we look at this, sobering kind of discussion and say, people got to speak up, don't they? They got to think about this. Read the bill. Read John Carpay's articles. Look at the Frontier website. I just encourage you. And if you disagree, hey, all power to you. But we've got to, if you don't have a forum to have a disagreement because the state has muscled in there with a bunch of bullies in tow and said, you can't talk about this, but you can talk about that, then we're done. John,
Absolutely.
Any suggestions? What can we do?
Well, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And there is an awful lot of room for Canadians of goodwill, Canadians who love truth and justice and freedom, to be far more engaged in the democratic process. I hear parents complaining about, we're the victims of this evil school board, and they've got all these, blue-haired and green-haired radicals that are foisting transgender ideology on the children, and, woe is us. We're just these, victims of this evil school board. Well, the reality is, the voter turnout in a school board election is what, 10, 15, 20%, maybe 30%, depending on the city or the election. So people don't vote in school board elections. I would venture a guess that the overwhelming majority of Canadians do not want little 5-year-old Johnny in kindergarten being told by his teacher that, Johnny, you might be a girl, and if you want to become a girl, you can. And parents don't want transgender ideology harming their own kids at any age. Parents don't want policies being kept in the dark if their own child is going to embark on a journey towards gender transition. So you've got, 80% just venturing a guess, or 70%, 60% of parents want to protect their children from transgender ideology. Well, those people have to be voting in a school board election, and they have to roll up their sleeves and they have to support candidates, or if there aren't candidates, they have to run themselves, right? So this is something that people can change, is stop being this victim. Oh no, we're the victims of this horrible school board. We're the victims of this horrible municipality that's doing terrible things. No, you're not. You're not the victim. Step up to the plate and get engaged in the democratic process, and then be persevering about it. Because the first time that you run, or the first time that you help volunteer for a good candidate, you might fall flat on your face and you might come in 3rd place or 7th place. Well, that's okay. You pick yourself back up, brush off your the dust off of your wounds or whatever, and now you've learned about how to campaign, so you go back at it again. So this is really important, and this is something that people can do, is to be far more engaged in the democratic process than what they are.
Right on. I like how you're thinking, John. In fact, I want to highlight a book that you released not too long ago. What is that book called again, John? About
I happen to have a copy of it here. Corrupted by Fear.
Corrupted by Fear. You talk all about this and the actions.
It's on Amazon. Yeah,
it's on Amazon. So fill your boots, people. We can act. We can do it. Marco, you had suggestions as well. What can we do?
Well, I think picking up on John's idea that we must participate in the process, and I would say maybe a step further than that is resist. And how you resist by speaking your mind. Put on the armor, if you will, and say what you mean in charity, in kindness, but say what you will. People have been persecuted for saying that a man is not a woman and a woman is not a man. Keep saying it. Keep repeating it. Stand on the corners, if you will, and keep saying it, because that is what you believe, and what you believe must stand. In the end, right? Hannah Arendt, who is probably the greatest philosopher of tyranny in the 20th century, said that the greatest damage that you can do to obsessive power is to mock it. So, if somebody tells you that a man is a woman and a woman is a man, laugh at them, ridicule them, resist them with every fiber of your being. That's how we reclaim the society we have tried to build.
Well said, Marco. Look, this is quite a time, and I want to tell you a very inspiring story that actually came out of last week's program. You may recall that we were talking about debanking and the need to ensure that you have a heart-to-heart conversation with your banker. Have you done that? Have you asked them? How are they handling these types of issues? And as a result of that program, I had 2 people tell me that they moved their investments to another bank that does have their back. And we had one of our guests on the panels was the CEO of the Bull Valley Credit Union that is vehemently against debanking. So I thought that was, kind of encouraging. And I would tell you on my own personal story, a few years ago, I moved my money with my dear wife to another bank for that reason. So you want to think thoughtfully about what you can do within your power and control. And if everybody did that, I think this country would be a better place, in my humble opinion. So as we wrap up today's program, I want to thank both John Carpay with the Justice Center and Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie with Frontier for joining us for this conversation. It's been a delight to talk with you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on your show.
And that brings to an end our program. And finally, I want to thank our audience for all your insightful comments. And be sure to join us next week at the same time and place as we continue our conversations. And I hope you have a terrific week. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.